Hi, I'm Piper. They called me trash. Said I was lucky just to breathe the same air as their son. At my own wedding, in front of strangers, investors, and cameras, my future mother-in-law leaned in and whispered, "You're not family. You're a problem we tolerated too long." They edited a video to humiliate me, planted a contract to silence me. Even my own mother stayed quiet. So I took the mic, and I made sure the world knew what they tried to bury. But here's the question. When a family like that falls, does anyone even notice the dust? I woke before dawn, when the first pale strands of savannah light crept through the shutters of the King estate. The house was silent, heavy with history, its marble floors reflecting long shadows from the columns outside. Along the hallway, portraits of stern ancestors seemed to follow me with their eyes, a quiet reminder that I was not one of them. Today was supposed to be beautiful, but my body carried more unease than joy. The guest room where I slept was immaculate, yet I felt like a tenant in a place I was expected to join, not belong. A maid slipped in with a silver tray. She avoided my gaze as she set down the coffee. I whispered a soft, "Thank you," but the word dissolved into the air, unnoticed. Then I remembered the dress. I went to the bridal salon tucked inside the mansion, where gowns rested like treasures. Mine hung at the center, ivory silk, lace that looked almost delicate enough to dissolve in light. My fingers trembled as I lifted it. I slipped into the fabric, but the seams pinched cruelly at my waist. The straps dug into my shoulders. It wasn't just snug, it was altered. The measurements weren't mine anymore. My breath caught. Altered. For someone else. I stepped back to the full-length mirror, staring at the reflection. The gown that should have carried me into my marriage felt like a costume designed for another woman's body. No apology, no explanation, just a quiet erasure. My heart thudded in my chest. The door opened with a soft click. Verena, my future mother-in-law, entered, a glass of tea in her hand, her posture as poised as the matriarch she believed herself to be. Her eyes swept over me, sharp, assessing, with a smile that never warmed. "That dress," she said, her voice smooth as glass, "suits someone like Isolde." Her tone carried weight, her words wrapped in polite cruelty. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, "You should feel lucky to be marrying into the King family. Not many get this chance." Lucky. Not worthy. Not chosen. Just lucky. I swallowed the sting and gave a small nod, a smile that felt brittle on my lips. Inside, I felt my spine stiffen. Gratitude had become their expectation. Obedience, their silent demand. I left the salon, walked quickly down the hall, and pushed open a side door. Outside, the gardens glistened with morning dew, magnolia scent drifting through the air. I pulled out my phone, hands shaking as I dialed home. "Mom," I whispered when she answered. "They changed the dress. It's not mine anymore. It was altered for someone else." Her sigh traveled through the line like a verdict. "Piper, dear, sometimes you just have to trust people with power. Be grateful." There it was again. Grateful. I ended the call before she could say more. My eyes swept across the estate grounds, silently begging for Corbin to appear, or for anyone to notice my fracture. One maid, one sister-in-law, even Isolde. But no one came. Only footsteps in the distance and the rustle of branches. I stood in a garden that wasn't mine, wearing a dress that didn't belong to me. By afternoon, Isolde drifted into the hallway, phone in hand, her voice coated with sugar. "You look lovely. Everyone's excited. Are you ready?" She angled herself to the mirror, snapped a quick selfie, catching me in the background like furniture. She didn't wait for a response. I nodded anyway, because nodding had become my language. Later, I found the veranda. The river breeze carried salt, mixing with magnolia blossoms. I closed my eyes and tried to recall the laughter with Corbin when love had seemed bigger than expectation. Nights when he swore he would defy his family for me. Mornings when his voice whispered, "You matter." But now, with Verena's silence and Isolde's smirks, he stayed quiet. He didn't shield me. He didn't even slow the tide. Evening fell. The dining hall glowed golden, candles lined along a table heavy with silver and crystal. Family friends filled their seats. Laughter curled up to the ceiling like smoke. Verena rose, lifted her glass, and with the authority of a queen declared, "To new beginnings, to a union that lifts us all from humble beginnings." Her words lingered, deliberate. Her gaze swept the table and landed on me. Applause rose. I raised my glass, smiled with the mask they preferred. But under the table, my hand curled into a fist. Humble beginnings. Their phrase, not mine. Their way of branding me as lesser. As silverware clinked and laughter filled the air, something inside me pressed too hard against its cage. It didn't explode. It didn't even cry out. It simply cracked. Quietly, completely. I sat there, seen yet unseen, and in that moment I knew. Something in me had broken, and I would never forget the sound of it. At the gala, when I smiled for the cameras, something inside me cracked in silence. The applause, the lights, the endless toasts, all of it blurred into noise I could no longer trust. By the next morning, the King estate felt like a mausoleum. I rose before dawn, moving through its long marble halls like a ghost. The staff bustled past me, eyes lowered, polite but evasive. I was both visible and erased. Still in my robe, I followed a restless pull toward the service wing. Behind shelves of linens and trays, I found a stack of invitation envelopes bound neatly with ribbon. My chest tightened. I slid one free and opened it. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the wedding of Corbin King." That was all. No bride's name, no mention of me, just him, Corbin King. My throat closed. I read it again, hoping to find a misprint, some oversight. But no, it was deliberate. A name withheld is louder than an insult. Clutching the card, I found Corbin in the breakfast salon, bathed in soft light. He sipped coffee, calm, composed, as though nothing could touch him. I slid into the seat across from him and laid the envelope on the table. "Look at this," I said, my voice raw. "Where is my name?" He glanced, eyebrows lifting slightly. "Probably a printing error. Don't overthink it." "Printing error?" My pulse roared in my ears. "They left me off entirely." "That's not a mistake, Corbin." He set his cup down, sighing. "Piper, let's just get through the day." That was all. No outrage, no promise to fix it. Just dismissal. His silence cut sharper than any argument could. I rose, walked out onto the veranda, and tried to breathe in magnolia blossoms to steady myself. Instead, I inhaled humidity and betrayal. My phone buzzed. A message from Mireya. "Meet, urgent, upstairs." Minutes later, I found her in the vendor suite, shoulders hunched, a heavy ledger spread open before her. Her eyes were rimmed with exhaustion. "I'm sorry, Piper," she whispered. "What is it?" She slid the ledger across. Columns of donations, disbursements, liabilities filled the page. One entry caught my eye. Project Stability Fund. Balance, near zero. Below it, Legal Settlement, V. King. And in smaller text, Reallocation from Private Donor, P. Carter Contribution. The room tilted. My hands trembled. The money I had given, believing it was to help furnish part of the estate, had been diverted. Not to a home, not to the wedding, but to bury a lawsuit Verena had quietly lost. My contribution wasn't generosity to family, it was a cover-up. "All this time," I whispered, my palm pressed flat against the page. Mireya's face broke with guilt. "I should have told you sooner." Her silence until now felt like another betrayal. I closed the ledger, my voice steady but sharp. "Thank you. I know enough." I left her there, moving through the hushed corridors until I reached Verena's study. The door was cracked open. I froze when I heard her voice inside, clipped and measured. "Yes, I moved the numbers. She won't notice." She was talking about me, not as a bride, not as family, but as a figure in a ledger, expendable, useful, then disposable. I didn't enter. I didn't announce myself. I stepped back, each breath louder than the last, and walked away. Fury trembled in my bones, but clarity sharpened my mind. This wedding wasn't a union, it was a performance, and I had been cast as a silent role. That evening, I slipped into the back gardens. The air was cooler, cicadas droning in the distance. I sat beneath the glow of lanterns and felt grief wash over me, not just for what was happening, but for everything I had ignored until now. Mireia found me there. She took my hand gently. This isn't just a wedding, Piper. They're trying to absorb you, to erase you into something you didn't choose. Her words pierced through the haze. I looked back at the mansion, its glowing windows like watchful eyes. The house was grand, but its grandeur suffocated. I inhaled shallowly, then straightened my shoulders. Tomorrow, I promised myself, there would be no more surprises. Tomorrow, I would guard my name, not as something they could print or omit, but as something they could never erase again. The ballroom lights had the soft, obliging glow of a place that expected nothing to go wrong. Crystal chandeliers spilled halos across polished floors, and a string quartet tucked beneath the dais played the kind of music intended to smooth edges and stitch nerves. I sat alone in that hush before the rehearsal dinner, the tablet in my hands, a small, warm rectangle against my thigh. I had asked to preview the highlight reel because I wanted, if only briefly, to see myself in the story they were about to tell. I wanted to be in the movie they'd made of my life. The planner smiled when she handed it to me, practiced and small. "We can run through it now," she said. Her smile was apologetic, as if she felt the ache she couldn't touch. I tapped play. The film opened luxuriously, slow drone shots of the estate's oaks, fountains pricking sparks in the late light, the gravel each guest would later tread. There were graceful close-ups of silverware and place cards, an aerial drift across the garden where laughter would bloom later in the evening. It was the sort of tasteful montage meant to stir pride and make every viewer feel that they were witnessing something timeless. Then the portraits began. Corbin laughing with old friends, a childhood snapshot in which his eyes were already a familiar promise. Verena standing at a balcony, dignified and cool, the camera loving the set of her jaw. Isolde pirouetting for a selfie, radiant as a practiced star. Each frame was placed with the invisible logic of legacy, one frame after another, polished, curated, inevitable. And when I searched for myself, rewinding and pressing back and forward until the film stuttered in protest, she said it softly, as if sharing a helpless truth. "We followed Mrs. King's media instructions." The words dropped like a stone. They were not an accident. They were a direction. The footage had been edited to exclude me. I let the tablet slide into my lap, the screen still blue with images of a life that had no room for me. Around us, staff arranged place settings. Servers moved with choreography I could read by rote now. The planner hovered near the doorway, her fingers worrying a ribbon. "I'm sorry," she said finally, the phrase courtesy more than contrition. Dinner began. Guests took their seats at the long table. Candlelight, crystal, the soft rustle of silk. Verena stood and lifted her glass. Her voice was warm enough for toasts, though there was a knife edge beneath it. "To new beginnings," she intoned, eyes sweeping the room like a conductor taking measure. "To union and to family, may both lift us from humble beginnings." The phrase landed with the soft thud of an order. Humble beginnings, hers to invoke as narrative, mine to carry like a label, everyone else to nod and archive into the comfortable story they'd been told to accept. I felt the air go thin. I lifted my own glass because the world expects rituals observed, and I put on the practiced face of compliance. But my hands, beneath the tablecloth, curled into a fist. When the formalities thinned and the music softened, I slipped into the garden. The night held a kind of brittle mercy out there, crickets underfoot, magnolia perfume in the air, hedges cut and precise. I let the warm coolness wash over me and sent a single text. "Are you okay?" Mireia's reply blinked almost at once. "I'm outside. Coming out." She found me at the fountain, where water hummed quietly and light from the windows slanted over the stone lip. She had that look, worn, careful, as if she'd been carrying too much for too long. "They didn't want you present," she said without preamble, her voice low, close to the water's sound. They wanted you absent. The video, the invitations. Someone made choices. I didn't argue. I had already seen the proof. I had already felt the omission in my chest. Instead, I walked to the fountain's edge, and without thinking about the symbolism, put my phone on the stone and hurled it across the shallow pool. It landed with a small, decisive crack. The screen spiderwebbed, the water ate the device's light. Mireya closed her hand over mine where it trembled. They don't want a bride, I said. They want a ghost. She squeezed my fingers back. No answer needed. One of us had to keep watch for both of us now. When we crept back inside, the slideshow had started without us. Images flowing across the screen at the front of the room. Corbin at 9, Corbin at 16, Verena in ceremonial poise. My framed portrait was gone from the timeline on the display wall. A space had been left, neat and unremarked, where my face might once have been. Every excision felt surgical, intentional, like cutting me out of a story someone else wanted to own. I took a breath and straightened my shoulders. There is a certain clarity in being snubbed so openly. You see the mechanism. You see who manipulates the stage and who applauds their script. Back at my seat, I could feel the ballroom's eyes in the way they slid toward me. Some polite, some startled, some skeptical. The quartet played on. The candles burned. I let the film play on until the credits rolled, and then I rose. Not because I had somewhere to go, but because standing up felt like an act I could control. I walked to the front, not to confront with spectacle, but to reclaim a small, undeniable center. When I reached the edge of the dais, I did not demand apologies. I did not shout accusations. I held my head high and let silence gather like a held breath until it felt full enough to be a sentence. You can edit footage, I said, voice clear enough to reach even the corners where whispers nested. You can move frames and place faces. You can choose who will be remembered and who will be left out of the reel, but you cannot edit what I have done. You cannot erase who I am. It landed, not as fury, but as truth. The room shifted, chairs creaked. There were faces that dropped their eyes in recognition, others that stiffened in calculation. Someone in the back, a cousin once deferential, stood and applauded quietly. The sound spread, tentative, then firmer, as if the room suddenly remembered how to make a different choice. Verena rose, lips compressed. For the first time that evening, her composure trembled, the faintest crack in the facade that had been so carefully constructed. Isolde looked away, the selfie moment gone flat on her tongue. I stepped down from the dais and returned to my place. The candles kept burning. The film's images still glowed on the screen behind us, but they no longer had the power to decide everything. I had found a voice and used it simply, to affirm, to name, to interrupt the polite erasure. That night did not unfold into melodrama. There was no grand showdown, no dramatic unmasking, only the slow realignment of attention and adjustment of the room's moral compass by inches. The timeline on the wall would not be miraculously rewritten before dessert. The invitations would remain printed until new ones were sent. But something fundamental had shifted. I had refused to vanish in the frame that others had prepared. Outside, the fountains whispered as I passed them again. The magnolia air tasted like salt, and something else. Possibility. Inside, people smiled with an effort. The quartet played a new piece, lighter at the edges. I did not pretend the night was a victory. It was not. It was a beginning. I had been edited out of the highlight reel, but I had stepped into the live moment and refused to be reduced to a missing frame. That refusal, I realized as I let the cool night air slide over my face, was the first stitch in whatever would come next. Dawn crept into the King estate with a pale, unforgiving light. It slipped through the tall plantation shutters, stretched long across the marble floors, and made the house feel less like a home and more like a stage waiting for its next act. I woke in silence, the kind of silence that pressed against the chest. The air itself felt weighted, each breath deliberate, as if the walls themselves disapproved of me taking up space. The cracked phone from the night before still sat on my nightstand, screen spider-webbed, its black glass reflecting fragments of light. It was more than just broken plastic. It was a reminder of everything fractured. My voice muted, my place erased, my existence reduced to a nuisance that others could conveniently edit out. I didn't touch it. I dressed in the same pale gown I had worn at the rehearsal dinner, smoothing the fabric carefully, determined not to shed tears that would betray me before the day even began. The corridors of the estate stretched long and grand, lined with portraits of stern ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow me with suspicion. I walked them with my shoulders squared, even as my stomach churned. Outside, the garden had already been dressed for the morning's family brunch, a tradition so ingrained in their bloodline it carried the weight of scripture. The scent of jasmine clung to the damp air, heavy and intoxicating, almost mocking in its sweetness. Spanish moss swayed from the oaks, whispering secrets I was never meant to hear. Staff moved about briskly, whispering behind hedges, their eyes darting away whenever mine met theirs. When I reached the courtyard, the setting dazzled. Endless white linen-covered tables stretched in pristine rows, adorned with hydrangeas and magnolia blossoms that nodded gently in the morning breeze. Crystal glasses gleamed, silverware was laid like instruments in a symphony, and the hum of guests settling in filled the space. The air rang with the kind of familial warmth I had always longed for, but none of it was meant for me. A planner gestured politely and led me away from the main tables. I followed, heels clicking against the stone, heart sinking deeper with every step. My assigned place was a small table tucked away beside the restroom corridor and the kitchen entry, a lonely chair, a view of service doors instead of smiling faces. The placement was surgical, deliberate, a performance of inclusion that was, in truth, exclusion dressed in courtesy. As I settled, I heard the whisper. Corbin's cousin leaned toward his companion and murmured, "Is she staff?" The words weren't meant to reach me, but they did. They pierced deeper than any shouted insult. I forced a smile that didn't touch my eyes, hiding the sting beneath practiced composure. I was not family, not guest, just an afterthought, placed where I could not disturb the symmetry of their narrative. Verena's perfume arrived before her words. She drifted past, elegant in her morning silk, her heels silent against the stone. She leaned close, her voice soft enough for only me to hear, but sharp enough to cut. "You're here because my son is weak, not because we wanted you. Try not to embarrass us today." She didn't wait for my reply. Her lips curved, satisfied with her strike, and she glided away to the head table where her smile bloomed for others. My chest tightened, a knot pulling hard between ribs. My mind screamed to answer her, to push back, to call her cruelty by name. But my lips stayed sealed. I would not beg for a seat at their table. I would not trade dignity for their counterfeit approval. I turned my steps toward Corbin. I needed, for a fleeting moment, to see in him the man who once whispered that I mattered, the man who promised to stand with me against his family's storms. But before I could reach him, a planner interceded gently, her hands folded in apology. "He's with the groomsmen," she explained. "Please don't interrupt right now." Her tone left no room for negotiation. I stopped. He had not even looked toward me, not once, not to notice where they had placed me, not to question it. So I walked away, quietly. The sound of laughter and champagne flutes ringing drifted through the windows as I passed. The brunch carried on without me, alive with a warmth that excluded me with deliberate precision. I returned upstairs, retreating into the stillness of my assigned room. The air felt thick there, the walls heavy. I closed the door and turned the lock. Standing before the mirror, I saw her, a woman in a pale silk gown, her jaw trembling though she fought to keep it still, her eyes rimmed red from a night of sleeplessness and betrayal. My reflection seemed to ask me who I was in this story, spectator, victim, or something else. I pressed my fingers to the glass. "I will walk down that aisle," I whispered to my reflection, "but I won't be the bride they expect." The vow steadied me. On the nightstand, the cracked phone glinted. I traced the line of its broken screen, remembering the rehearsal video that erased me, the invitations that excluded me, the ledger that stole from me. Each memory tightened my resolve, layering doubt into defiance. I took my time readying myself. Every fold of fabric was smoothed with care, each strand of hair pinned with deliberation. I packed a small purse, just essentials, nothing more. It wasn't armor, but it was preparation. As I descended the hallway, voices drifted from the dining room. Verena's voice rang clear above them. "Let's begin soon. Show her a place she truly deserves." The words dripped with false warmth, the kind that masks cruelty and civility. I paused, the ache in my chest nearly unbearable, but I kept walking. I would not stop at her command. The bridal room waited. I entered, the light sharper here, unsoftened by chandeliers or drapery. I studied my face in the mirror one last time. I touched the trembling corner of my mouth until it steadied. I pressed powder against the shine of tears. The hum of garden voices floated faintly through the window. Guests gathered, family gathered. They believed they had written me into a role so small I could vanish in it. But I knew better. I smoothed the lace at my waist and whispered to the silence, "I carry my name with me. You will not take it." And when they tried to force my hand, they would learn the one truth they had overlooked. I still had something no one could strip from me, my choice, my voice, my will to decide who I would be in this story. Not their ghost, not their gift, but myself. The moment they placed that black folder in my hands, I understood exactly what kind of bride they wanted me to be. Not a wife, not a partner, not even family. They wanted me bound, silenced, erased in fine print. The bridal prep room was beautiful on the surface. Velvet chairs, soft lamps glowing against gilt-framed mirrors, lilies perfuming the air. But beneath it all, I felt suffocated. The very walls seemed to press in with the weight of every insult that had ever been dressed up as civility in this house. My lace gown hugged me perfectly, my hair pinned, my makeup flawless. To any outsider, I was the image of composure. Inside, though, it felt as if my veins carried fire. The knock at the door was soft, almost apologetic. A young paralegal entered, her gray suit pressed crisp, her shoulders stiff as if she too bore invisible chains. She held out the black folder with both hands, her voice neutral. "Mrs. Verena requests you sign this before the ceremony begins," she said. "Just a formality." Her words pricked me. Just a formality. As though I had not spent every moment in this estate enduring tiny acts of erasure, my name missing from invitations, my face cut from video reels, my presence shifted to corners and side tables. Nothing here was just anything. I took the folder, its weight sinking into my palm like stone. My fingers trembled as I flipped it open. The first page was dense with legalese, assets, inheritance clauses, guardianship contingencies. My eyes scanned faster, my pulse racing. Every clause bent toward one outcome, my exclusion. If I ever challenged, if I ever dared to speak, I would lose everything: home, financial rights, even access to any children I might one day have. The second page burned worse, a non-disclosure clause. The language was sharp, merciless. If I ever said or even implied anything that defamed the King family, they could sue me, bleed me dry, strip me publicly until nothing remained. Even my silence could be twisted into guilt. This wasn't a prenup. It was a straitjacket. I looked up at the paralegal. Her gaze slid down, unable to meet mine. She repeated softly, almost like a prayer she was forced to recite. "It's standard. You'll understand later." No, I understood now. Too well. Before I could form words, the door opened again. The wedding coordinator entered briskly, clipboard in hand, her smile professional but hollow. "Oh," she said lightly, "just so you know, you won't need vows tonight. It's family tradition for the bride to listen and smile." I froze. For a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe. Even my voice, my only chance to speak, was being stripped away. They didn't want vows. They wanted obedience, silence dressed as grace. The air in the room thickened. My heartbeat roared in my ears. I pressed my hand against the paper, feeling the ink like venom seeping into my skin. Should I refuse? Should I storm out and let them choke on their own arrogance? But I knew the fallout. They would say, I ruined everything, call me ungrateful, make me the villain of a story they already rehearsed. And yet, if I signed, I would be complicit in my own erasure. I made my choice. I picked up the pen and signed only the first page, just one line, enough to buy myself time. Then I closed the folder with deliberate calm, slipped it into the prep room drawer, and angled it so it looked as though it had been returned empty. If they questioned it later, I already had a plan. I rose. My gown fell into place around me, ivory silk trailing across the polished floor like armor masquerading as lace. My footsteps echoed down the long hallway, steady, unhurried. Every door I passed concealed whispers and judgment, but I did not falter. The air smelled of polished wood and lilies. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting pale, fractured colors across the marble. At the chapel entrance, Mireya waited. Her expression held concern, but also a flicker of pride. Our eyes met. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silent nod told me she knew exactly what I was doing, building a different kind of silence, one born not of submission, but of refusal. I stepped across the threshold into the chapel. Guests were already gathered, their heads tilting, their eyes trailing me like I was a specimen under glass. Candlelight flickered, music swelled softly. Every detail shimmered with curated perfection. At the altar, Corbin stood waiting, his tuxedo immaculate, his stance poised. But his eyes were distant, unreadable. Once, those eyes had looked at me across a cafe table, full of warmth and defiance. Once he whispered promises of protection, of choosing me over tradition. But now, in this chapel, he looked less like a man and more like an ornament of his family's empire. I inhaled slowly, measuring my breath. I remembered the laughter we shared in quieter times. I remembered the night he said, "You matter." But memory could not shield me. He had not spoken up when they erased me. He had not pulled me closer when they placed me at the margins. The promises had bent, and now they were brittle. Step by step, I walked the aisle. Each footfall was heavy with judgment, yet each carried its own defiance. The ivory train trailed behind me, not as surrender, but as a ribbon of resolve. Guests leaned in, whispering to one another. I felt their stares, their speculation, the silent inventory of every detail of my posture, my smile, my silence. I swallowed their weight whole. I did not weep. I did not tremble. I smiled, not for them, but for myself. A quiet, private smile that said, "I am here, even if you do not wish to see me." As I reached the altar, the hush deepened. The minister cleared his throat. Corbin glanced sideways, waiting for the script to continue. But inside my chest, one thought pulsed louder than the organ, louder than the hush of the crowd, louder than the weight of the family legacy pressing in on me. They demanded obedience. I would grant them none. They believed the final card was theirs. They thought binding me in contracts, silencing me in vows, and parading me like a trophy meant they had won. What they never understood was that I had been carrying a card of my own, one sharp enough to cut through every gilded mask they wore. The chapel was beautiful that evening, undeniably so. Rows of brass lanterns glowed against white rose petals, their soft light spreading warmth through the aisle. Every seat was filled, every gaze fixed, every camera lifted. Outside, gray clouds gathered above the moss-draped oaks, but within those walls the family orchestrated perfection. I walked the aisle in silence, ivory lace trailing behind me. Every step felt rehearsed, expected, demanded. The minister's voice floated through the air, even and practiced, as though he had officiated 1,000 ceremonies just like this one. When the moment came, I nodded at Corbin. I repeated the lines placed in my mouth, not ones I had chosen, not vows I had written. My voice sounded strange, far away, like it belonged to someone else. To the guests, I looked radiant. To the cameras, I was the picture of a glowing bride. But to myself, I was a ghost watching my own erasure. When the final hymn concluded and the candles dimmed, the procession shifted toward the ballroom. The tall doors swung open to a roar of applause. Corbin's hand slipped from mine almost instantly as investors, colleagues, and family friends swarmed him. He was gone in seconds, his voice blending with theirs, his smile for them alone. I stood stranded in the center of that room, beneath a canopy of chandeliers. My gown glittered under the lights, but I felt like a shadow. Guests brushed past me, clinking glasses, exchanging hugs. Verena glided through the crowd like a queen, her regal poise unshaken. Isolde followed close behind, her phone raised, scanning faces as if curating content for her next triumph. Neither spared me a word, not even a glance. This was their stage. I was merely a prop in their play. Then, the screen behind the head table flickered to life. A montage began. Soft music, sweeping images. At first it seemed harmless. Childhood photos of Corbin with tousled hair, his early awards, clips of Verena smiling at charity galas. The guests cooed and clapped, but then the tone shifted. Grainy videos appeared, ones I recognized instantly, old Facebook clips from years ago, my college nights in a tiny dorm, my 25th birthday in a cramped apartment, study sessions at a public library where I stayed until closing. Except they weren't shown honestly. They had been twisted, edited with mocking sound effects, laugh tracks, and distorted filters. My face warped into caricature, my laughter turned to ridicule. The room erupted in laughter, not polite chuckles, real laughter, cruel, guttural, sharp. Each laugh cut deeper than any insult ever spoken to my face. I forced my gaze steady and scanned the room. My eyes landed at the AV console near the stage. Isolde stood there, smirking, her chin raised in triumph. She locked eyes with me and didn't look away. Her victory was intentional, precise. And I broke eye contact first. The laughter grew. My throat tightened. The air in the ballroom thickened. My vision blurred at the edges. I turned toward the tables where my own mother sat, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. For one desperate moment, I searched her face for outrage, for shame, for any signal of solidarity. But she remained still. Her eyes met mine briefly, then slid away. She would not intervene. She would not rise. She would not defend. And in that instant, the realization pierced me with finality. I was utterly alone. Not only within the King family, not only in this ballroom, I was alone in my own history, stripped of even the comfort of maternal defense. I turned away. No words, no outburst, just a slow, steady turn toward the exit. The laughter trailed behind me like poison, echoing even as I pushed through the hall doors into dim corridors. In the mirror across from me, I stopped. My reflection was stark. The wrinkled silk of my gown, streaks of mascara down my cheeks, hair unraveling slightly from its pins. I looked nothing like the bride they wanted to project. But what stared back at me wasn't weakness. My eyes held something rawer, sharper, resolve. I inhaled, my chest rose, steadying. I reached into my purse. My fingers trembled as I pulled out my phone, its cracked case catching the light. For a moment, I hesitated. Then I dialed. The ringtone pulsed in the narrow hallway like thunder rolling in a storm. A click. A voice answered. I whispered, calm and low, "Upload it." No explanations, no conditions, just 3 words. Then I hung up. I smoothed the skirt of my gown with trembling hands, turned back, and walked toward the ballroom. Inside, the mocking video sputtered to an end. Guests clapped awkwardly, some still chuckling, others shifting uncomfortably. The chandeliers gleamed. Silverware clattered against china. Murmurs rippled like static. And then, one by one, eyes turned toward the entry, toward me. I walked back inside. My steps were quiet but unflinching. The crowd parted instinctively, as though something in my presence demanded space. Cameras pivoted, flashes sparked. Verena's head snapped toward me, her eyes sharp with alarm. Isolde's smirk faltered. I offered no apology, no explanation, just presence. They had promised a perfect evening, a flawless story of legacy and unity. Instead, they handed me a stage and dared me to reclaim the story they had tried so hard to erase. And I would. Because what they didn't understand was this. Sometimes the sharpest card you hold is not shouted, not flaunted, not begged for. Sometimes it is played in silence. And when it lands, it rewrites everything. The ballroom lights dimmed just enough to signal that something had shifted. The chandeliers above flickered faintly, the candle flames along the tables swayed as though they, too, felt the tremor moving through the room. The hum of conversation faltered, softened, and then nearly vanished altogether when I stepped back inside. The people who had spent the evening mocking me, dismissing me, pretending I was invisible now turned their heads. I kept my posture steady, chin high, shoulders square, eyes unyielding. I didn't walk quickly, nor did I drag my steps. Each movement carried the certainty of someone who had nothing left to lose. My gown caught the low light, every sequin reflecting a sharp glint, as if the dress itself was armored. I wasn't here to play their part anymore. I was here to deliver my own. The DJ's music faltered briefly, a few chords of strings and soft percussion hanging awkwardly in the air. Guests tried to keep the rhythm, glasses clinking and couples swaying, but their eyes stayed glued to me. Even the laughter, the false merriment, the polite conversations about stocks and society dinners, all of it fell into a suspended hush. I moved past mirrored pillars and gauzy drapes, watching my reflection shimmer and multiply in each panel of glass. For a moment, I saw 100 versions of myself walking side by side, one beaten, one silenced, one erased. But the one moving forward now was the only truth, a woman who had finally chosen to speak. The DJ looked at me, startled but waiting. His hand hovered above the controls. I locked eyes with him. Without hesitation, he passed me the microphone. The weight of it filled my palm, cool metal against warm skin, steadying me. The chatter ended completely. The bubbles fizzing in champagne glasses were the only sound until my voice cut through the silence. I was called trash, I said, my words sharp, deliberate. A gold digger, someone unworthy of this family. My tone did not waver. But let me tell you what I am. I paused, long enough for every ear to lean in. Free. The ripple was instant. Gasps, whispers, camera phones rising, lenses pointed. I saw a man choke on his drink. A woman's hand froze halfway to her mouth. The tide of shock spread through the room, pulling all pretense with it. I shifted my gaze across the crowd, finding Verena where she stood near the head table, her posture queenly, her pearls glinting beneath the chandeliers. I watched my name erased, I continued, voice carrying. I watched my work stolen. I listened while my dignity was mocked over and over again. My chest tightened, but I did not break. You called me a charity case. You told me I should feel lucky. But I am not lucky, Verena. I am not your project. And I will not accept a role I never auditioned for. The silence was suffocating. No coughs, no cutlery clinking, no music. Just the weight of my words settling over them like ash. Then I raised my cracked phone, the same one they thought symbolized weakness. I tapped the screen. The ballroom's projection screen flickered to life. At first, static. Then the grainy footage filled the air with its jagged truth. A voice recording. Verena's voice. Her unmistakable cadence, cold and sharp. We'll use her money to plug the foundation losses. She's too desperate to say no. The sound bit into the silence. Faces shifted in horror, disbelief. Some covered their mouths. Investors at the head table stiffened in their seats. A glass shattered on the floor, forgotten by the hand that held it. The murmurs came next, low at first, then louder, waves of disbelief, disapproval, shame. Guests turned their heads, not toward me, but toward Verena. She stood rigid, her mask cracking, her lips pressed tight, her eyes darting. For once, she had no words. I steadied the mic one last time. This is not a mistake, I said clearly. This is who she is. I let the microphone fall. The metallic crash echoed against marble, thunderous, final. The sound reverberated in the high ceilings, down the arched corridors, into every corner of that grand, suffocating hall. I turned then, not toward the crowd, not toward Verena, but toward Corbin. My husband, my would-be partner. He stood pale, his posture rigid, his face stripped of the smile he had worn so easily for investors and strangers alike. I met his gaze, calm and even. You never defended me, I said. Not once. So I'll defend myself. By leaving you. His lips parted as if to argue, as if to stop me. But no sound came. He was part of the illusion now, the family's perfect fiction, and illusions cannot stand against truth. I turned away. The crowd broke into a stunned path before me, clearing the center of the ballroom as I walked. Sequined gowns and polished shoes shifted back, whispers colliding, cameras still flashing, but none daring to intervene. My heels struck against the marble with unflinching rhythm, each step a drumbeat of finality. The grand hallway opened before me, lined with mirrored windows and towering arches. My reflection followed me in fragments, flickering in gold and shadow. The chandeliers above dimmed further, as though the house itself bowed under the weight of what had been revealed. And then I stepped outside. The Georgia night wrapped around me like a balm, cool, vast, infinite. The air smelled of magnolia and damp moss. Stars blinked faintly above the Spanish oaks, silver threads through a navy sky. My lungs filled for the first time all evening, deep and unrestrained. At the curb, beneath the indigo canopy, Maria waited. A vintage sedan idled behind her, headlights glowing softly, the hum of its engine promising escape. She stood tall, a small suitcase at her side, her face solemn but steady. Our eyes met. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She simply nodded, strong, silent solidarity. I walked to her, every step carrying me farther from the chains of that ballroom, that legacy, those lies. We didn't look back. Together, we lifted the suitcase, opened the car door, and slid inside. The ballroom with its chandeliers, laughter, cruelty, and betrayal faded into the distance behind us. Ahead stretched a road unknown, but it was mine. For the first time in years, the future belonged to me, and me alone. Freedom is loud, but healing? That comes in whispers. The dawn after the night I walked away found me in a modest motel by the coastal inlet. No wedding dress hung in the closet, no faint scent of floral arrangements. Only the quiet hum of an air conditioning unit and the slow rise of a pale morning. Mireya brought me a paper cup of coffee and set a folded newspaper on the bedside table. She drew back the curtains slightly so I could see the world outside, the sea's edge shimmering under clouds. She nodded at the headline. King wedding ends in chaos. Bride speaks out. I felt the slow burn of validation. My voice had reached beyond walls carved of money and lineage. The world saw me, or at least they saw a story I refused to surrender. We stayed for a bit in that room, neither speaking. I took a sip. Coffee bitter, grounding. I retrieved my cracked phone. Notifications flooded in. Hashtags, retweets, news sites quoting my speech. Hashtag gold digger or truth teller, hashtag Piper speaks, hashtag mic drop queen. It felt surreal. The person everyone wanted silent was suddenly everywhere. By midday, I had calls from smaller news outlets, women sharing stories of erasure, gaslighting, disloyalty. I replied with measured statement, this was never about scandal. It's about naming truth. Later that afternoon, I learned Verena had filed a lawsuit against me, defamation, breach of contract. My stomach clenched, but then I recalled, I never signed the final page of that agreement. The clause was invalid, the court threw it out. When I got the notice, the dismissal, I felt a rush, relief, vindication, a strange blend of vindictiveness and peace. The law, for once, belonged to me. News outlets pounced. Analysts wrote about King Group's shifting image. The pulse of gossip moved. I watched from my phone as sponsors pulled funding from family foundations. A business journal published a scathing expose. Legacy or illusion, the House of King's secrets. Corbin went silent. Isolde wiped her accounts. The King Empire trembled. At dusk, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. It was a single sheet of stationery, its edges softened by handling. I unfolded it carefully. You were never trash. You were the only real one. No name, but I knew whose hand had written it. A former maid, someone who saw me when I was hidden. Not light, not glamour. Real. I held that piece of paper in my fingers as the day dimmed. I closed my eyes. That was enough. The world moved on. But some scars, they choose to stay. Freedom is loud. But healing? That comes in whispers. I awoke to the salty tang of ocean breeze, the sea calling softly beyond the cottage window. My fingers brushed the linen curtains. The world had moved on, but inside me, some scars remained. Subtle, constant reminders of the war I chose to fight. I rose and dressed simply. No lace, no silk, no borrowed expectations. Just jeans, a soft sweater, and the quiet comfort of shoes I could walk in. I opened my laptop and checked my calendar. One shift at the legal aid clinic, a meeting with a former client, and time to draft a volunteer workshop. My life now centered around giving voice, not seeking validation. At morning light spilled across the porch. I carried coffee outside and took in the view. The low tide, gulls circling, distant piers. In that silence, I allowed myself to feel the toll. Exhaustion, relief, resolve. Mid-morning, a soft chime from the laptop drew me back. Emails poured in, messages from women half a world away, survivors, mothers, daughters, people I had never met. One stood out. You reminded me that silence isn't strength. Speaking up is. I let the words settle. My pain had sparked someone else's courage. Later, I drove to my mother's house. It was in the same small town where I grew up. Quiet streets, autumn leaves scattered, familiar smells of pine and wind. My mother opened the door with a polite expression. She looked older, hair softened by silver, shoulders curved. "Piper," she said, voice steady. "You look well." I stepped inside. The room smelled of old books and lavender. We sat across from each other in the living room. I held the frame of the wedding photo, me, standing alone. I placed it gently on her coffee table. "I came here not to argue," I said, "but to show you what I became." She watched without speaking. I expected tears, regrets, defense. Instead, a hush, a quiet tension. "I won't ask you to explain," I continued, "because I don't think you have one." She lifted her gaze. I felt her silent ache, but no apology came. Instead, she nodded once. Not bitter. Just done. I stood. I kissed her on the forehead. Then I walked out. I did not look back. Driving back, I passed by memory, the downtown strip mall where I sold stationery, the cafe where I and Corbin first met, the library where I studied late. All of it part of me. Scars and strength entwined. Back home, I unboxed the wedding dress from a delivery box, ivory fabric softened by time, lace edges delicate. I could have destroyed it, hoarded it, cursed it. Instead, I folded it carefully. I called the local youth center, foster children preparing for prom night, and arranged a donation. "This was meant to cage me," I whispered, "but let it set someone free instead." I wrote a note and slipped it inside the dress. "Wear this. Know your worth." That afternoon, Maria came for a visit. She sat beside me under an ancient maple in my small yard. Leaves drifted down like slow-motion breath. She asked quietly, "Do you ever miss him?" I looked at her, wind-ruffling hair. I breathed deep. "No." I paused. Then I said, "But I miss the girl who thought she needed him." We sat in companionable silence. I felt a soft warmth return. And then I laughed. Not in mockery, not in sadness, but in simple survival. They took my title, my seat, my name. But what they never touched was me. Sometimes walking away isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Piper's story reminds us that dignity isn't given by family names or wedding rings. It's claimed when we choose ourselves over silence. Have you ever stayed quiet just to keep the peace, only to lose yourself in the process? If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button. More raw, real stories are coming your way. Stories that don't just entertain, but speak the truth we've all been afraid to say out loud.